You are watching the Illusionist Interrogations with the travesty starring David Sandy.
Welcome to the 5th Illusionist Interrogation podcast. I am the Travesty, and today we're going to be learning a bit about our next guest. He's a collector, speaker, corporate entertainer, magician, businessman, manager, producer, past local and international Brotherhood of Magicians president. And did I mention he's a collector? Please welcome David Sandy.
Thank you, Travis. Wow, I'm so excited to be here. That's quite an introduction. You make me sound better than I really am.
I mean, how many illusions do you have now?
Oh my gosh. I would say somewhere between 170 and 180 illusions in the collection. But interestingly enough, I only perform about 3.
Oh, well, maybe I built up that intro too much. No.
Yeah.
So let's start this thing off. Let's go back in time. How did you get started?
In magic, I got started when I was about 6 years old. I went to a very small elementary school. In fact, it was so small there was no kindergarten. So my first year in school was the first grade. And near the beginning of the year, the teacher said that we needed to make some kind of presentation. It was kind of show and tell, for kids. And it was supposed to be really, elementary at that time. But I went home and I was kind of stressed over this. I didn't know what to show and what to tell. I grew up on a farm in Northwest Missouri, and I could show a ear of corn or something like that, but that wasn't too exciting. So my dad taught me a little card trick. It wasn't a very good card trick, but it was a 4-ace trick. And my dad is not a magician. I don't know where he learned this trick, but I went to school and I performed that 4-ace trick. And that's when the bug sank its fangs into my being, because not only were the kids in my class, keep in mind I mentioned it was a small school. It was so small that first and second grades were in one room. Third and fourth grades were in one room. That's how small it was.
Wow.
So I did this trick, and not only were my classmates impressed, but the teacher was impressed. And I thought, wow, I can't believe just the expression. They didn't necessarily say anything, but just that momentary expression of surprise. And so that's kind of what set the hook. And so I went to the library and wanted to learn more magic tricks. Once again, it was such a small school. There was one book in the school library. I checked it out, and I kept rechecking it out over and over and over again. And finally, I went to the county library, and I checked. They had a couple of magic books. And so I started learning things, making my first tricks out of cardboard and poster board and things like that. And about a year later, I was asked to do a magic show, my first magic show, and I got $5 for it. So that's how it all started. I was 6 years old.
Now, do you remember what those books were that you started off with?
I do. In fact, I have them in my library now, because I don't have the actual books that I checked out, but I actually have the duplicates of the books. One was called The Secrets of Magic, and it was very impractical things. It was more of a history of magic, showing, different magic methods and things of, like I remember one thing, was taking a long dagger about this long, and you could run it through your cheek and out the other side and open up your mouth, and they would see the dagger pass through. That's not something a 6-year-old kid's going to do, but that was one of them. Another one's called Fun with Magic, and that's the one I actually learned some magic tricks and made some of my own things about. But in my years of collecting, of course, I wanted those first books, so I've got those books in my library.
What did you perform? Do you remember what any of the tricks were?
Oh, I do remember several of the tricks. One of the tricks that I did that failed miserably, when I was a kid, I saw a magician do a trick, or I saw a little magic show, and I went up to him afterwards, and I asked him, I said I was interested in magic, and he gave me a sheet of dental dam. And dental dam is that rubbery material for the classic where you push a dime or a quarter through a sheet of rubber. You know what I'm talking about? So anyway, he taught me how to do this. And I went to my dentist and I asked for some dental dam, which he gave me. because it's literally a supply that dentists use. And I remember setting that trick up. I had the dime the dental dam all stretched over it and everything like that. And then it's sitting on a glass. And whenever I went to do the trick in my show, because the dental dam had been stretched over the dime for maybe an hour at this point, because of my setup and, waiting for that trick to come on, it actually tore the dental dam broke. It's like if you take a rubber balloon and stretch it and hold it like that so long, it'll probably develop a little weak point and tear. So I couldn't do the trick. But I did that, and I remember I had a set of Adams Chinese sticks that I did. I had some production tubes, where that I learned out of the first book, which was two. I made them out of poster board, two tubes that maybe about this tall that nest, one slightly smaller, nested in each other. You'd show one empty, and then you'd pass one through the other one and show the other one empty. And basically the method was a transferring load. I just made a little hook that the load hooked onto out of a coat hanger. And I remember doing that, and a little card frame I had ordered from online from a company called what was the name of it? TV Magic Ltd, TV Magic Limited. You see, about the time I got interested in magic, I saw an infomercial on TV. It was Marshall Brodeen advertising the TV magic cards, which were what we know today as a Svengali deck. And I ordered that. And once you order that, you got on their mailing list. And so I would order a few things that I incorporate in my show, little royal magic tricks.
Knowing what you know now, is there something you would tell yourself starting off that you didn't know then?
Well, gosh, magic has afforded me such incredible experiences. I mean, I can tell you this little hobby, as a result of my dad showing me this card trick, has developed beyond my very wildest dreams. And I would have never have dreamed at that time that I would have been able to experience some of the things I've been able to do over my life. But to your question, would I, maybe knowing what I know now, would things have been differently? Maybe not at that age when I was 6 to 8 years old, but as I got into my teens, I might have looked at things a little bit differently. To me, you have magicians who are good technicians who can just do amazing things with sleight of hand, second deals and bottom deals, and just wonderful things with cards. And I've worked with some of those magicians. Doing table hopping magic or strolling magic is not one of my favorite things to do, but I will do it. And typically when I do it, I'll hire other magicians, if it's a corporate event or whatever. But I can tell you this, I honestly believe that every other magician I've ever hired to do strolling magic is far more talented than I am when it comes to sleight of hand and things like that. I mean, here I am, I've got standard things. I've got an invisible deck, in one pocket, and some rope and some shears in another pocket, and a thumb tip. I'm using very standard things. Whereas some of my good friends who I respect very much are doing knuckle busting sleight of hand. And I, at the end of the day, even though I'm ashamed sometimes that I'm using such simple methods, but at the end of the day, I think to a lay audience, they don't really realize, that I'm using invisible deck or a rough, smooth deck. And when the next guy is doing something that's taken him, 5 years to master, because if the presentation is entertaining and the magical effect is strong, they don't know what has really gone into creating that magical effect. And so to go back to your question once again, I know I've already said that once, I probably would focus more on developing entertaining routines as I was growing up instead of learning complicated tricks and trying to master complicated tricks. Although that's very good in respect to people who do that. But my point is, at the end of the day, when a lay audience watches a magician, they don't know whether they're necessarily watching something that required 5 years of diligent practice or using a gimmick that they can't see.
Yeah.
So I think the most important thing at the end of the day is the presentation must be entertaining, magical, and who cares how you get there.
Well said. So let's say someone's starting in magic, they have $100. What do you think they should get? What tricks, what books, what should they do?
Well, there are so many options for beginning magicians today that weren't available when I was a kid. First of all, videos weren't available. You either learned when I was getting into magic through books or through personal instruction from someone who, another magician who was generous enough to give you their time. In my case, I was very fortunate, it was Fawcett Ross. And today, you don't even have to buy a video. You don't have to buy a book. You can YouTube and learn magic. But one of the dangers I feel is though, even with video, when VHS videotapes came out that were instructional and then subsequently DVDs, I think learning sometimes by watching someone else do the routine and then teaching how it's done, it could possibly lead to someone copying, not only learning the trick, but also copying the presentation instead of making the presentation their own. And I think that's really important, that everybody has their own unique personality. And there are some things that, although a person could do the trick, a person with personality A could do the trick if they learned it, and a person with personality B could do the trick, but it's their presentation. And some tricks just aren't for those personalities. Personally, when I watch a show and I'm wanting to when I'm watching magic and looking at different options, whether it be at a dealer or in a book or whatever, I can pretty much instantly tell, hey, I think this could fit my personality. And it wouldn't fit everybody's. And just like some of the things you do, Travis, would not necessarily fit my personality. So I think a lot of the wisdom comes from determining what works for you and what type of magic fits best your personality, so that at the end of your show, you have a cohesive personality repertoire of tricks or routines that you presented that are congruent with your personality. And all of a sudden you just didn't, I mean, imagine if I opened my show, as Jeff McBride, and then the next trick I did as the Amazing Jonathan, and the next trick I did as Eugene Berger. It doesn't make sense at all. Now, I could potentially do the same tricks they were doing, but I need them to do them with my personality instead of modeling myself after what I've seen on video of theirs. And so once again, to go back to your question, as you see, I have a tendency to expound on things to get where we're going.
It's all great, though.
If someone had $100 to spend, I would first of all look, and this is free, look at as much magicians, not teaching magic, but look at as much magicians as you possibly can on the internet and YouTube. Everything from the classic magicians to the legends and the Marvin and Carol Roy, Sly Dini, Norm Nielsen, Dave Vernon, Charlie Miller. Watch all of these great magicians and then determine, what makes their magic so well received. And then after you've determined that direction based on whoever inspires you, whether it's, I don't know, whoever that inspires you, based on all this research you've done in watching magicians, then invest in something that's going to get you to that personality instead of just throwing a dart at a dartboard. And maybe if you are a naturally funny guy and you watch people like Michael Finney and Stephen Bargatze and the Amazing Jonathan and the silent act, or Carl Ballantine and some of the silent comedy acts. If comedy is your thing, I don't know that I would use that $100 to invest in a card manipulation video, because you might be able to make back palms and all these great sleights funny, but it's not as natural. So first of all, I think you need to get a grips on who you are, what you want to be at the end of the day, and then making your investment, spend the $100 accordingly. And that could be on books. That could be, maybe here's an interesting thought. When I started producing events and conventions and things like that, I thought I wanted to started producing magic TV shows. So I contacted Gary Willett, who produced all the world's greatest magic specials. And I said, I'd love to come out and just shadow you. I just like to stand behind you and watch and learn and see what you do. If I need to sweep the stage or backstage or whatever, just to do that, that's fine. So in that case, I would use that $100 to take him to dinner after he gave me that opportunity, because being there and experiencing these things firsthand is going to give me far more education, hands-on real-world experience than maybe a book that was written in 1962, how to produce magic TV specials. Not that there was one, but I think you get the point.
That is actually the most unique answer I've ever gotten from that. That's great. So just to go off of that, so if there was a magician that is similar to your style, that's let's say really well known, and that person just disappeared, no one remembered it, like it was one of those Beatles movies that just only you remember that magician. Is there a magician that you think that you could do the act of without wrecking it too badly? I don't know how else to word that.
Well, I think I'm a bit of a talker, as you probably have already figured out. So I'm, there are a lot of great magicians who I enjoy watching perform very, very much. People who are performing today, and people who were big in the 1950s, 1960s. I probably liken myself a little bit to maybe a Paul Daniels, because he talked through a lot. When he presented illusions on his TV shows, he talked a lot. Of course, he was doing new material, developing new material, he and his staff, every week. But I'm not a dancer. I could never do things, where illusions, where, I had to do a whole 2 minutes worth of dance with the assistant and make it mysterious. That's not my style. I would rather do something like Robert Harbin, where, I've really come to appreciate Robert Harbin's presentation of the zigzag over the years. When I grew up, zigzag was one of the most popular illusions ever. And everyone that I saw did it the same way. The zigzag cabinet would be on stage. The girl would come out. Music would be playing. Nothing would be said. The girl would get in. The illusion was presented. And at the end, the girl got out. She was back in one piece. When I watched Robert Harbin on old clips do the zigzag, it was nothing like that. He talked through it. Everything made sense. Why the blades are there, why the center of the cabinet is moving sideways. And it just made more sense. So I dug my zigzag maybe about 4 or 5 years ago out of the warehouse, and I wanted to present it Robert Harbin style. And I enjoyed doing that so much more than the way I'd done it when I originally purchased it. I think I did it to the theme from the Pink Panther TV show or something like that, because I just think it's a better trick that way, or better illusion that way. So I would say a combination of Paul Daniels. I think I have a nice personality on stage. Paul Daniels was well liked. He could always say something, which obviously I can do. He talked through a lot of his presentations, and he was obviously very popular. So someone along those lines, I would say.
All right. Now, when was your first big show that you were just like, all right, this is it. I'm doing magic the rest of my life. What's the most impactful show, at least?
Well, when I was in school, when I was in seventh grade, I took a shop class, and I wanted to build. I didn't want to build, gun rack or a lot of the normal shop class projects of that time. I wanted to build magic, and so I would started learning to build magic things. The first thing I built in my seventh grade shop class was the boy to rabbit illusion, and it was based off the abbot's plans. And there's a secret gimmick in that illusion, and I built that at home because I didn't want any of my classmates to see, what the gimmick was. But everything I built in shop, as everyone else is working on their projects. And then from that experience, I kind of learned to build, not very well, but I started building some of my illusions, my own illusions. I built a shadow box, and I built the worst thing that I ever built was off the abbot's plans. It was the Thurston model sawing a woman in half. I would build my illusions in my parents' basement, and the only power tool I had was a saber saw, which if you try to rip a 8-foot piece of plywood with a saber saw, make a line straight, it's not going to happen. But anyway, I built this Thurston sawing a woman in half in my parents' basement. And to this day, it is still sitting in my parents' basement, because even though I learned in shop class to measure twice and cut once, as they always say for a woodworker learning, measure twice, cut once, which I did, but I did not measure the angle of getting the prop up the stairs and out the front of the house. So I was never able to, after I built it, it was too big to get up the stairs and around the corner. So it still sits there to this day.
That's great.
But of the few illusions that I did an assembly for my own high school. I was a junior in high school, and I did an assembly, and the principal asked if I'd like to do that. And of course, working for your own peers when you're a junior in high school that's a trial by fire, because first of all, they want to crucify you, sure. But I did that, and I did a suspension, the boy to rabbit, which I used as a production of my assistant. I did the shadow box, and it went relatively well. And I thought, I just love the idea of illusions, and I would always dream of someday owning one of those illusions that I could see in a Tannen's or Abbott's catalog. They always said price upon request, so you never knew how much the big things were.
Too much.
But who knew? Had I known then, that today I would have so many. Gosh, it's like I'm living the dream. I'm living my childhood fantasy.
Yeah. How many props did you have back then that you didn't take care of very well that is worth a fortune now?
I was always very good at taking care of my props. I was very anal about that. I learned to sew bags, basically like pillowcase type bags, 3 sides, with an opening on the end. And I would actually use my mother's sewing machine to sew bags that like if I had a crystal silk cylinder, I had a bag for the tube, and I still do to this day. Everything goes in that bag. I have props that I got when I was maybe 10 years old that I've used my entire life, and they still look like they just came out of the magic shop, because I'm very persnickety about those types of things. And that's one of the reasons that I've never really loaned out my props, because I see magicians take their things and throw them in a trunk or throw
I can't stand that.
It drives me crazy, but yeah.
All right. What's your least favorite type of crowd? Like,
my least favorite type of crowd would probably be junior high school students. I love performing for elementary school students. I like to get silly with them and do all the things that make young kids, scream, and, the sucker routines and things like that. And I enjoy performing for high school students, like at the after prom events and lock-ins and things like that. I do completely different stuff, of course. But it's that transitional, that 6th to 8th grade, that student, that's my least favorite, because first of all, a lot of them feel like they're too cool to really engage in the show. It's just a tougher crowd.
Yeah.
That I say tougher, but I would also say it intimidates me the most because I feel like I'm a little bit out of control. And junior high students today are different than they were, 20, 25 years ago too. So it's a generational difference as well.
What would you say the hardest trick is to perform and to learn?
The hardest that I do, or just in general?
Both.
Well, the hardest trick performed, that's pretty broad. There's so many things I can't do.
But what's the hardest?
I've always been very impressed by guys who can do a muscle pass. The way they can take that coin and hold their hands 18, 20 inches apart, and that coin just looks like it. First time I saw that, I thought it was a thread, of course. And just, and I have played around with it to the point where I get, this part of my palm all sore, but I've never committed to it to master it at all. But that's, for me, that's one of the hardest things because, I could maybe get it to go 4 or 5 inches, but these guys, who can do this and it just flies right up.
Yeah.
That still to this day impresses me. I know there are things that are more difficult than that, but that's one of the things that, because I've tried it and found it, so difficult, I appreciate that. I think there are tricks that are difficult to perform, but I think the big difficulty that I see failure most frequently is not mastering the mechanics of the trick. It's making a presentation out of the trick. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, we're here to entertain people. We just use magic and amazing things as the vehicle to entertain people, whether that means making them laugh, making them escape from the troubles of their day or the troubles of their week or the troubles of their life for a moment, or just give them a momentary sense of a childlike wonder that they used to experience when they were kids, just giving them that nostalgic moment. And typically that comes with not only just the mechanics of the trick, but it comes with the entire presentation. You and I, we both seen performers who we know it's a trick, but their presentation is so good, whether it be something of mystery, whether it be, like Eugene Berger, or when Aussie Wind, or any of these guys, we know it's a trick. We know that they're not using supernatural powers to accomplish these things, but it's so well done and the presentation is so strong. We have that suspension of disbelief for just a moment where, we buy into it, even though we're not really buying into it, if that makes any sense.
For sure. What illusions would you recommend a beginner illusionist to start off with, and what ones would you recommend they don't mess with until way down the road?
Well, I would recommend, one of the biggest challenges for illusionists is rounding up the assistants. Because, I started off using my high school girlfriend as my assistant for a number of years, and then someone else, and you invest all this money in these illusions, and then the assistant is always elusive unless you happen to marry someone who is assistant material, and you become a team or a partnership in the routine.
And that can go wrong too.
that can go wrong as well, as we have seen. But I have evolved to the illusions that I perform now are illusions that I can do without a rehearsed assistant. It's either someone from the audience or someone that takes very, very little rehearsal, almost rehearsal on the fly. So to answer your question, if someone's getting into illusions, think about something that you don't have to, that's very practical. It's practical for the venues that you'll be performing in. If you're doing private parties in homes or in churches or something like that, you probably don't want an Azra levitation. You want things that are going to be practical for where you're performing. To me, it would be a plus if I didn't have to rehearse, 2 weeks with an assistant for the one gig. So some of the things that I like, there are a variety of suspensions out there where you can take someone from the audience and give the illusion that they're levitating in midair. From all types of, you can do everything from like a Super X levitation all the way up to the Zany Blaney ladder levitation, which travel fairly small and can use a person from the audience. There's a lot of magicians start out by doing the flying carpet. Personally, the flying carpet was never one of my favorite things because I felt like it left little explanation. And the one explanation that it did leave is the correct solution to the puzzle. I think there are times when audience penetrations are appropriate, i.e. like the wrist choppers and head choppers and things like that. If presented right, there's things that happen in the world these days where I think those need to be avoided because it hits a little too close to current events. So those are one-man illusions. Lately, I've been doing, for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been doing the through steel illusion, which is just me and the prop. Pack's very small. Yeah. And so those are the types of things that I think I would be recommending to a young illusionist, getting into. Nothing like the girl in the drum or the Azra or things that require overhead rigging and moving van in order to get the prop there.
Oh, but those are the fun ones.
Yes, I know.
What would you say is the most impactful trick that you've ever seen as a kid and as of recent?
Well, I will tell you, one of the most impactful things I saw when I was younger was the slicer illusion, because I didn't see that coming. All the blades go in, and I know we've seen it countless times now, but I remember the first time I saw it, I'd never seen it before. And, she's laying vertical in the box and all the blades go in. And I thought, okay, we've got a variation of a blade box or cutting a girl in sixth here, only horizontal. And I thought the blades are going to come out. She's going to come out unscathed. But when that box extended out and we could see those little 13-inch segments, I remember that I literally did a internal gasp on that. So that's one from when I was younger. I think that today I love seeing David Copperfield do flying. I think it's one of the most beautiful illusions ever created. I love the idea of levitation. There are so many things that are so great about a levitation because, number one, it's something that even in a photograph, it telegraphs something magical is happening here. A girl like the fire cage, the girl in the cage, just a still photograph of that. Well, you can't tell that she wasn't there before and there was fire in there. But a levitation, it could be a 90-second routine to a 7 or 8 minute routine, if done properly. And it's just a great piece of theater. So I'm partial to levitation type effects. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So during this pandemic, have you learned a new skill that you wouldn't have learned if the pandemic didn't happen?
Well, a new skill. I have been inspired because of this other Zoom show that we do. We get to talk to a lot of great magicians, and there's a lot of interaction. We've been doing it for 29 weeks now, and a lot of that discussion on those shows, I'll end up buying a book. In fact, I just took a stack of them down from that table before we started the show. You can kind of see them sitting in the chair. I bought several books, that were talked about on that show because I was inspired by some of the topics that were discussed. And so, I've learned maybe some different thinking, some different theories, and maybe some different methods and technique. Have I learned to back palm 3 decks of cards? No, I haven't. Have I learned a specific skill? I'm trying to think. Probably not. But I've been inspired during the pandemic, and that wouldn't have happened, or these different inspirations that I have, and new topics and newfound interests in areas of the history of magic and collecting, had it not been for the pandemic.
What is the best and worst thing that's happened to you on stage? Have you ever had an audience member wreck your show or try, or is there a good story?
Probably the worst thing that happened to me was during one of our Ring 129 club shows, where we had maybe 5 or 6 performers on the show. We had ventured to Carthage, Texas to do a club show. So we all, we took several vehicles down, and I was pulling a trailer full of illusions, and we were at a little community college in their Performing Arts Center. It was a Panola Community College in Carthage, Texas. And I was opening the show with a Owen Magic Supreme flash appearance. It's a framework of a cabinet with chaser lights all around it. You can see all the way through it. Puff of smoke, there's the magician. Then I would walk forward and produce a dove. And this particular theater, from tech time to the opening night show, we were doing 3 nights worth of shows there. From tech time to opening night, something had been changed in the lighting. And so on that particular show, I appear in a puff of smoke. I walk forward to produce the dove, and I did not see the edge of the stage. So I walked with 100% confidence right off the front of the stage. I dropped straight into the orchestra pit, and I landed right on my heels. And so I didn't fall down. It's just like I walk out, and all of a sudden I'm down, and you could walk right out of the orchestra pit down the main aisle. And so I appear in a puff of smoke. I walk forward. I drop into the orchestra. I just keep walking, go right up the steps, right down, and I stand in the center of the aisle, and I produce the bird. Of course, I was shocked. The audience was more shocked. I remember seeing people sitting close in the front row, almost like lunging forward to try to catch me, but I didn't want to play it off like it was a mistake. I wanted to play it off like it was intentional. But I found out the next day, I was doing a head chopper routine later on in that show, and every day I would go buy a bag of fresh carrots at the local grocery store. And I remember walking in to the grocery store, to the produce section, to get a bag of carrots for that night, for the following night's performance. And some kid riding in the shopping cart with his mom, you know how kids ride in the shopping cart with the legs hanging out, saw me and said, "Hey, Mommy, there's the magician that fell off the stage last night." So, a 7-year-old kid knew I fell off the stage. I didn't fool anybody. So that was the worst thing. Plus, on top of that, I bruised my heels. And if you've ever had bruised heels, that takes a long time to heal. And so I was kind of hobbling around for the next 3 or 4 weeks.
But you didn't hurt the dove.
The dove was fine. The show went on. And the following 2 performances, I knew exactly where the edge of that stage is. So that's probably the worst thing. The best thing that ever happened to me on a show would, I will tell you the best thing that happened to me right after a show. And this was one time I was performing at the Magic Castle. And growing up in rural Missouri, I always dreamed of performing at the Magic Castle. I read about it in Genie magazine. I even got to visit it during the daytime once before I was old enough to get in. But the first time I performed at the Magic Castle, I believe, was probably about 1989. And in the mid-90s, my parents actually flew out to Los Angeles to see me at the Magic Castle one time I was performing there. So this was a great thing. I was very excited. My parents were coming to see me in Hollywood, at the world-famous Magic Castle. And so they came and saw my show. I was working in the parlor. And then after my show, I was working early parlor. So after my last show, we went up to the dining room to eat. Now, my mom was born in the mid 40s, and the only magic she knew about growing up on TV was the Magic Land of Alakazam with Mark Wilson and Anya Darnell. And so I'm sitting there in the dining room overlooking Orange, which goes down to Hollywood Boulevard, and looking out the window, and it's just the perfect Hollywood picture. You can see some searchlights of some, in the sky of some movie premiere that's going on, and I'm there. My parents have seen me at the Magic Castle, and Mark Wilson walked up to our table, and I knew Mark. Mark, knew I was working that week, and for some reason he knew my parents were there, and my mom, most importantly, knew Mark because she grew up watching him on TV. And Mark said, "Mr. and Mrs. Sandy, we are here at the Magic Castle. We are so thrilled to have David performing with us this week. We look forward to him coming to share his magic every time he's in Los Angeles." And Mark Wilson just built me up so big in front of my parents. So that was probably one of the best things that ever happened. Of course, my mom and dad were super impressed because they were Mark Wilson fans, growing up and watching him. And I thought that was such a classy thing for Mark to do. So, yeah.
That's awesome. What's something that you did as an amateur that you would never do now?
As an amateur that I would never do now. Gosh, that's a good question. When I was maybe 16 to early 20s, I always looked younger than I really was. And I actually did the bra trick, the dreaded bra trick at that time. But I did it because my personality then, and even somewhat now, is that I'm a Midwestern, more of a wholesome apple pie type person. I would never use blue language or do anything offensive in my performances. If anything happens that is somewhat questionable, it happens by accident, or it happens because of something that happened spontaneously or an audience member did. I never wanted to be, do blue material or innuendo or anything like that. But so I did the bra trick. And what I would do, I would get a gentleman up and explain that I'm going to teach him one of the classics of magic, the age-old vanishing knot trick. And I would take two scarves and I would tie them together in a knot, and I would, I'm going to hand them to him, say, "Now your job is to make them vanish. But of course you need an assistant. Every magician, has an assistant." So I get a lady up there to stand between us, and I tell her that her biggest job is to make sure this guy is a big hit. And in show business, we measure the success of a performance by the amount of applause they get at the end of the act. So I tell her, "You're going to help me ensure that he gets a huge round of applause from all these people. So here's a little known secret in show business. If you stand in front of an audience with your hands out like this, with your palms out like this, and you do this with your fingers, audiences can't help but applaud." And I say, "Go ahead and try it." And she does this, and the audience plays along, and they all start clapping. I say, "If you do it faster, they clap louder." And so I said, "It's imperative that you're ready to do this, because the climax to his trick is going to happen at a somewhat unexpected moment. So you need to have your hands in that position at all times. Do not move your hands from that position, because when the magic happens, I'll give you the cue. You give the audience one of these, they burst in applause. He's a big star." So I've conditioned her that she cannot move her hands from this position. So the knot is tied between the handkerchief, and I said, "Now it's time for your assistant to hold on to the knot." And of course, she looks at me because I just told her she can't move her hands from these positions. And I act like, oh yeah, your hands are busy. Let me just drape it over your shoulder. And as I drape it over her shoulder, I would tuck it into the back of her collar. And then because I was using pretty heavy handkerchiefs, a lot of times it would just, by the weight of it, when I let go of it, it would slide around here. So I never put my hands in her shirt or anything like that. I always played this off as we are now in this situation by accident because her hands are like this, And the only thing that I ever said, now when I said to the gentleman, I said, "Okay, now it's time to make the knot disappear. So I'll turn to your left, and I said, turn towards the knot. Of course, he turned sideways, facing the woman. And I said, now make a pass. And a magic pass, because I'd always got to laugh. That was the most suggestive thing I ever said. And so, he makes some kind of a magic pass or something like that. I said, you grab one end, I'll grab the other. The audience, on the count of three, we're going to pull it. The audience will see that the knot has completely disappeared. The handkerchiefs will fall free. And then I say to her, that's your cue to give him one of these. Of course, when we pull, this comes out. And so it all looks like it happened accidentally, and it's the other guy's fault. I tell you that whole thing, that whole routine, because I would never do that today for a number of reasons. First of all, society, that is not to be done in today's society has changed over the years where, that if that's not offensive to the lady, it's going to be offensive to someone in the audience, maybe offensive to the gentleman. Someone's going to be offended. It's just not appropriate. But I would never do it today, even if that weren't the case, because I'm now of an age, I'm 56 years old now, where I was, 17 then. I'm an innocent little kid.
Yeah.
Now I'm potentially a dirty old man if I do something like that. So that's the other reason I would never do that today. So it's not in the show.
All right.
It hasn't been for a long time.
So what's the best magic show you have ever seen in your life? And what's the worst? No.
Oh, geez.
You have to answer the second.
The best magic show. Gosh, I've seen so many. The shows that I really like are shows that feature a lot of great magicians. I've seen some great shows at magic conventions because they feature a lot of great magicians. You get a little bit of, like Shimada and Norm Nielsen and Slidini and so those are probably some of the best shows that I saw. I can't put my finger on one. Some of my favorite shows that I like to see today who are still performing, of course, David Copperfield.
Mm-hmm.
He's
a requirement.
Yeah, he's always on the list. I enjoy seeing a lot of my friends perform. I like acts, but you said shows because so many of my friends don't do a complete show. I think Rick Thomas does a great show. Mm-hmm. He's got a lot of production value in his show. I think Darren Romeo does a great show. There's so much variety. He is such a great entertainer and knows how to establish a rapport with the audience within the first, few minutes of the show. Those would probably be my favorite shows that are still working today.
All right. What's your favorite act?
Oh, my favorite act that's still working today? Gosh.
Could be not working or working.
Oh, just so many. Shimada, Marvin and Carol Roy, Slidini, Norm Nielsen. Gosh. So I love to laugh. I think Chipper Lowell's a very funny guy. Dana Daniels I love his performances. I have so many. Gosh, I could never narrow it down to just a favorite.
I'm shocked you didn't say one of my favorites, Tom Mullica.
Oh yeah, well yeah, of course.
The cigarette is ridiculous.
Yeah, I worked with Tom for many years, but it was the Red Skelton. By the time I managed and produced his show, he had pretty much set magic on the shelf and was doing the Red Skelton show. But he is, talk about, he can take the silliest little moments that happen spontaneously in his magic and make it a 10-minute routine that just literally brings down the house, so he was a master of that.
He was amazing. Let's just go off to a side topic here. Have you ever had your act stolen, physical props, or mentally?
Stolen? No, I don't think I have that I know of. I've been very, very fortunate. Some of the routines I do, I've had people contact me and ask permission, to do them with my story, my presentation. To my knowledge, I don't think anything has ever been stolen. The only thing that was stolen was my own fault. It was when I was producing shows in Branson, Missouri, and I had a Joe Leffler mental epic, Supreme Sleight of Mind is what it's called. in the back of my car, and I went to Lowe's one time to get a few things. And as I was loading things in the back of my car for the theater, I set the mental epic out because I had it in like a portfolio case. I sent it out. And then I forgot to put it back in the car. When I went back to Lowe's after I realized it 20 minutes later, it was gone.
Oh,
no one had turned it in. So some layperson has this dry erase board divided into 6 sections that they have no idea what it is,
That's funny.
But
what was the most
not maliciously stolen.
Yeah. What was the most expensive magic purchase you've ever done?
The most expensive would probably like collections of illusions. I was very lucky to purchase the Andre Cole show a couple of years ago. Just recently, I purchased a lot of stuff as Owen Magic Supreme were closing their doors, a lot of their big illusions. So those are probably the most expensive things. The Andre Cole show would be the biggest one.
What's the most expensive one item?
Gee.
I feel like you buy so many collections that it's hard to answer that question.
It is hard to answer that question. There are quite a few things, I'd have to think about that. It's probably going to be some illusion that I have,
Well, how about this? What is the largest illusion that you have?
Well, interesting you say that, because I don't have the super mega, no vanishing Ferrari illusions like that. But, some of the bigger props that taken more space. I remember I had to rent a forklift to get osmosis out of the warehouse one time. A lot of the things I bought from Owen are very large. I've got a John Gone water torture cell that's in a huge case that takes a forklift to pick it up because of the weight.
That's
wild. The Andre Cole pieces, there's some set pieces that are very large, as well. So, Again, I'm not giving you a specific answer, am I?
All right, so let's talk about mentorship. Tell us about yours.
Well, my mentor eventually became a man pretty well known in magic, Fawcett Ross. He lived here in St. Joseph, Missouri, where I live now. In fact, up there behind me, you see one of his Ghost Show posters on our mantle. That's signed to me by Fawcett. Fawcett was born in 1900. He passed away in 1987. And I pretty much took care of him from about 1981 up until the time of his death. I met him when I was maybe about 15 or something like that. And then I lived about 40 miles east of St. Joseph, so I only saw him about once a month. But when I was old enough to drive, I'd drive down and spend a Saturday afternoon sitting literally on the floor. He'd sit at the end of his sofa, and I'd sit on the floor kind of in front of him, and I'd listen to the stories, and he'd show me some magic and teach me some things. To this day, the stories that he shared are more meaningful to me now because they were literally, he lived a good part of magic history, and he was such great friends with so many greats, Charlie Miller and Ross Bertram and Danny Dew and Dave Vernon and all these great performers. And so I got to learn about these people and even meet these people, when I was just a teenager. So he was my mentor. But over the years, I've developed other mentors in different areas of my magic. Someone who's not much older than I am, my good friend Tom Burgoon, I consider him a mentor in the sense that we always work the Magic Castle the same week together, and often we're working the same show together at the Palace of Mystery. And Tom gives me such great feedback on things I'm working on, and he's another set of eyes and another great creative brain to look at some of my magic that I'm working on and give me great feedback. So I consider Tom not only a great friend, but a mentor as well. I've had so many wonderful mentoring experiences through my life, through magicians who are still living today and those who are no longer with us. When it comes to mentoring others, I think it's very important, that those of us who've been fortunate enough to learn through experience and through passing of the mantle, so to speak, from our own mentors, that we, hand off that torch to someone else and share. Sometimes, we get burned. Sometimes we invest time into a young person who's wanting to get into magic, and then, they either lose interest in magic or they discover girls or whatever. But probably the most frustrating for me when it comes to mentoring someone is when a young person, seeks advice from magicians who have decades of experience. And then after about a year, they feel like, or they get it in their head that they have now arrived and they no longer need or put a value on the wisdom that comes from experience of their elders. And, they get a little cocky and that's a little bit disappointing. I always, to the greats who are still around, I think it's important that we remain humble, because they're always good. If they're older than we are and they have more years of experience, they always have more experience than we do. And that's something that we can learn from. We are never going to know more than they do necessarily, because they've got the advantage of years on us. So I just think that if someone is looking for a mentor and someone is gracious enough to take this person under their wing and share them and offer them a mentorship, then that should always be held with respect, or that person doing that should, be respected. And it's not that you can't move on to other mentors, but, a person's invested a lot of time, and often at times it's just for the sheer joy of passing it on to someone without any remuneration or anything like that.
I feel like having a mentorship is kind of a dying thing, but I don't know. Do you agree with that, or is that just...
Yeah, a lot of times people are finding mentors through the digital medium of watching YouTube, and that becomes a substitution for their mentors. Sadly, we don't have magic shops like we used to, and a lot of young magicians would find mentors in that magic shop owner, that demonstrator. And, that element has gone away by and large and been replaced with non-interactive YouTube videos. I think Zoom, the pandemic, has brought about technology, or made technology more available for people who want a mentor, and you can still do it from your own home, But anyway, one of the things that I'm looking forward to in just a few moments, we're going to go to our Kansas City ring meeting, because it starts here in just about 25 minutes. We're going to see a lot of performances from people, and hopefully, some of them will seek out constructive comments as a result, with the idea that, their act could become better. And I'm looking forward to seeing those. I know that's starting here very shortly.
Who, other than your mentor, who are 3 people in magic that you learn from the most, or mentors anyway?
The 3 people I learned from the most, I would definitely put Fawcett Ross up there in magic, because a lot of what I learned was business related, and so that wouldn't have necessarily been in magic. But I'm going to throw this person in there anyway, because he's a producer, and I've applied a lot of what I've learned from him to producing my own shows, magic and otherwise. But he was a great producer in Branson by the name of Joe Sullivan. So I probably learned so much from him. So Fawcett Ross, Joe Sullivan, and then, gosh, there's so many, Tom Burgoon, Michael Lamar, just people who've become such good friends. I'm gonna have to stall on you on that one, because I can't think of who I want to make my third choice, because there's so many great people.
I mean, it didn't have to be 3, just...
Yeah.
Just who
I mean,
inspires you?
I love watching magicians I've never met before and learning from them. You know, like I mentioned earlier, Paul Daniels and Robert Harbin and some of these folks. I never had the opportunity to meet them, but I've learned by watching their style and their presentations.
All right. In a short answer, what would be something that is not magic related but has inspired you in the magic world?
Definitely music. My mom's a music teacher, and I play piano. And I would listen to when I was in high school and college. I'd listen to film scores, and I would imagine magic happening to that score. And so I use a lot of music in my show, and some of my best routines, I think, work as well as they do because they're scored to great music. So music.
All right. Uh, when you started out in magic, all the way from back then to the current day, how do you think it has changed? And do you think that the average magician is more skilled now, or did we get lazy using gimmicks?
Oh, I think there's an increase in skill by magicians today. I mean, some of the things I see at convention contests and stuff like that, I just think that it's not possible. I know how tricks work. I know sleights, but what I'm seeing, it looks like real magic. So I think I think the bar has been raised. Not that it wasn't high, you know, back in the days of the greats that went before us, but there are new techniques in sleights and things like that being developed today, and methods that have just I'm full more today than I ever was.
We're almost at the end here. What are the best resources that have helped you along the way, specifically in books and websites and whatever else?
Well, the best resources that helped me along the way, I mean, books are great, websites are great, but the best resource is learning from people and becoming friends and building relationships with people who know more than I do, who are willing to share. So networking in magic, I think, is probably the best thing that I would advise anyone, because that's what's worked so well for me.
All right. And is there any advice that you would specifically give to the people listening at home?
Advice,
Just in anything.
well, my best advice is not magical, but if you're a magician, I've always been a huge proponent of saving and investing because, I mean, this pandemic is the reality now, and a lot of my friends who are full-time performers, they saw their schedules become instantly open, you know, earlier this year, and some of them had saved back, you know, money from their earnings and not lived beyond their means. They've lived well within their means while still being able to save and invest, and so, you know, they're surviving this. And others, unfortunately, they would spend, you know, 99 cents out of every dollar they made, either on lifestyle or material things or things like that. So my advice is to do not live beyond your means. Save for retirement, and if not for retirement, for something horrendous like what we're experiencing now, where very few entertainers have been working for the last 10 months.
All right. We're coming up here. We are at the final thing, the lightning round, where I ask you lightning quick questions to get to know you better as a person. Are you ready?
Okay. Ready.
What's your favorite color?
Purple.
Favorite cereal?
Oatmeal Raisin Crisp.
Favorite band?
Chicago.
Apple or Android?
Apple.
Does pineapple belong on pizza?
Yes.
And finally, what is your pet peeve in magic?
My pet peeve in magic. Probably, this is a lightning round, so I feel like I should be spinning this out so quickly. This is like sheet lightning, you know, where it slowly rolls across the horizon.
The storm's coming.
Yes, exactly. My pet peeve in magic is probably magicians who are not willing to listen to other magicians. Magicians who might make their magic better and their presentations better, but they're very close-minded and they're not open to any type of feedback. I'm not talking about unsolicited feedback, but they just don't want to hear anything.
Any names that you would think? No.
No.
All right. So, David, thanks for joining me. Thanks for being interrogated.
Thank you, Travis. This has been a lot of fun. You made me think, which is good. So it's been fun. Thanks for choosing me to be on your show. It's been great, and I look forward to seeing your show continue. Best of luck with it.
Thanks. Is there any place people can find you? Anywhere that they can send you a message if they have a question?
They can email me, david@davidsandy.com, or friend me on Facebook, David Sandy, and
Right
I'll respond there. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, there we go.
Any projects
Thanks
coming
again.
up? Any thing happening on Sundays?
On Sundays, we've got the Magic Collectors Corner for a few more weeks. It's gonna be great. It's on Zoom, and all you have to do is join our Facebook page, Magic Collector Corner group, and you can get all the announcements right there.
All right. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Travis. Have a great evening.
Well, David, thanks for agreeing to be interrogated. For those listening at home, we'll be dropping these once a week on average. If you have any suggestions or guests you'd like to see, leave them in the comments down below. Or if you'd like to contact me for something, drop me an email at theofficialtravesty@gmail.com. Thanks for listening and have a day.
Follow the official travesty on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or email him at theofficialtravesty@gmail.com.
Like, comment, and subscribe, or else.